Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Commercial Connections Investing with Confidence. I'm your host, René Nelson. And today I have my most favorite guest. Doug Palmer has been a longtime friend, but really he is a great advocate for my clients in the real estate industry. And I'm super excited to have Doug here. And I'm going to let him introduce himself because he has such a rich history. He's been an electrician. So I'm just going to let him talk about his background and then we'll get into some questions.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Well, I started out as an electrician, of course, apprentice. And then about 5-6 years later, I became an electrical contractor, which I was electrical contractor for 20 years before I sold that. And then I started home inspecting and worked into doing commercial inspections during that time. I started that in 2001. Then it evolved down the road to where I gave the home inspection business to my son-in-law and just do commercial inspections only. So with you being a commercial agent, we've been doing business together for at least 20 years, maybe more, 25 years. Always enjoyed working with you.
Well, when you look at the skinny little portion, when you have to go through under primarily a house, you have to tilt your head sideways, cram your head in, put your head back in, then get your shoulders through the hole. And Doug told me years ago, he's like, I'm too old for this. I'm just not going to do this. So he hired a young guy to what we call crawl the spaces. And then Doug became so busy with commercial inspections, he just gave the residential portion up in his business and moved to commercial. So yeah, we're going to talk about everything, soup to nuts, for the inspections that Doug and I have been through. We're going to try to educate you on, if you're through the eyes of a buyer, what you should be aware of, through the eyes of a seller, if you're thinking about selling your property, if you should maybe have a little mini inspection. It's always good to know how to get ahead of things if you're going to put your property on the market. And then one thing that Doug and I are seeing right now is the insurance, and I've talked about this on other podcasts. The insurance world, it's a little bit of a Wild West right now. They want to know what's been updated for plumbing, electrical. They'll send drones out and look at the roof. So that's one thing that Doug has experience in also, is doing inspections for insurance companies.
Correct.
So if you don't mind, let's just jump into some questions.
Sure.
All right. I promise I won't try to stump you.
Okay.
Not today. When you're walking up to a property for the first time and you put your tool belt on and you're getting ready to do inspector mode, when you're standing at the curb and you're looking at a property, what's the first thing that you look at?
As I pull up, it's mostly curb appeal. Like, how updated is it? Does it look nice? Is this painted? Is this property manager or property owner maintaining their property for the long run? And pull up, I notice how old is the property? When was it built? Was it built in the 50s, 60s, 70s? Makes a big difference on what systems need to be inspected closely. Like anything from the 50s could be galvanized pipes, and they're, have a 50-year life, and we're already at 75 years. So has it been updated?
What happens with galvanized pipes, for some people may not know, what happens when those start to rust out and you get a problem?
Yep. They rust out from the inside out, and where the threads are cut on the couplings is thinner there, and that's the first place you get a leak. You see some corrosion, and then you crawl around some more, and here's one that's actually dripping. And I've been under properties where it's just a stream running out and nobody knows it. Nobody's been under there for years, or they don't notice the water bill's gone up. And same way with the sewage system, the sewage piping. Back in the 50s, they used galvanized pipes. Nowadays, it's all plastic, so it lasts a lot longer. Same thing happens. It rusts out at the joints. Or even actually in the horizontal pipes, you'll see these little dimples, little white dimples. And that's right where, and then you can see a progression on some of the pipes where, it's dripping right from that spot. And if you just touch it with a screwdriver, it'll break right open.
Oh my goodness.
The steel's so thin.
Wow. Doug's inspected some properties for me that we've had galvanized pipes that had failed. I was representing the buyer, one in Lebanon. the galvanized pipe had failed and there was raw sewage under the building. If I remember right, you just lifted that crawl hatch and you were like, you got to call Roto-Rooter and have this all mucked out. You got a problem.
Yeah, I don't remember the particular one, but there's been a few of those where, yeah, or one end of the building is fine. I get towards the other end and here's all this sewage. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I remember on one of those is the coupling came out and everything from the garbage disposal was going right under the house.
That's right.
Under the apartment.
All the kitchen sink drainage was just dumping on the ground. So all that wet garbage from the garbage disposal was rotting, and
yeah,
it's quite a mess.
Whew, man.
And nobody knew it.
I was going to say, I really admire you. I'm a dry heaver by nature. I don't think I could do it. So I really admire that. When you start to inspect, you're very methodical. So tell me about what your process is when you start to go through a building like an apartment complex. What's your process?
An apartment building, I like to start on the units themselves and go in each unit. Most apartments are fairly common, living room, dining room, kitchen, hallway, bathroom, couple bedrooms, maybe 2 bathrooms, and just inspect that way. Check the date and date the water heater. Check for dry rot and toilets leaking that's rotting the floor, bathtub spilling over and rotting the floor. Under the kitchen sink is usually an issue. The tenants will just let it leak, and a little bit of water, no big deal, but it rots out the cabinet. So I generally go through all the units that way. Note each unit, photograph each room, and then make notes about each room, take pictures of anything that's an issue. Then move to the exterior and inspect it next. And then if it's got a crawl space, then it's crawl space, attic, and roof in that order. Then my report software kind of flows that way. So they're on my camera in that order, and I can lay it out that way.
I've followed behind you many inspection. I learn something every single time. That's why I just toddle along, because I'm listening and I'm trying to see it through your eyes, but also be there for my buyer. One thing that we see a lot, and especially in the University of Oregon area, is that black mildew in apartments behind couches and things like that. We both know college kids are trying to save on the energy bill, so they'll crank their heat down to 0. Tell the listeners what happens with that and how do you protect that? Because the worst thing you want is a call from a tenant to a landlord, hey, I've got black mold. Well, it's not really black mold.
It's
so
mildew, yeah. Yeah, you see that a lot. There's certain buildings that happens more to. Obviously, a 1950s building without double pane glass. A lot of those back then just had ceiling heat, which the heat doesn't really flow behind furniture and stuff like a wall heater that's blowing heat, or a furnace that's circulating the whole house. And then with the temperatures turned down, you get condensation going on, especially on the outside walls, because they're colder, and even though they have the heat turned down to 60, it's still warmer inside than outside, so you get some sweat on the wall. And then that mildew starts growing on the wall because it's got, food and water and warmth to grow, and it's not necessarily black mold. The only times I've really seen bad cases of black mold is a leak on inside of walls from a roof or plumbing issues, and then you can be any wall, outside, inside wall, and you'll just see big black rings where these colonies grow. And that's the stuff that puts off some spores that bother some people. They call it toxic mold, but it's not really toxic to everybody. But it's a big concern for tenants, and the city has enforcements on black mold. So all the calls I get to just go say, hey, there's black mold, I find 99 times out of 100, the tenant's causing it because they've got an aquarium going and it's putting moisture in there, or they're not using the fan over the stove, or they've got rice cookers going all day. And you walk in and the humidity's 70, 80% in there, but yet the temperature's down at 62, 65. So that's when you're going to get the condensation on the walls and the mildew growth. Just by venting the place, running the fans, having an efficient bathroom fan that pulls the moisture out, some apartments, you have to put that on a timer. So at least it goes 1 hour a day to get that moisture out of the house, because kids close up the windows tight all winter and they get that condensation going. I do inspect that with an infrared camera just to make sure, because that'll show you visible moisture in the walls and ceilings. And where it's prominent is ceiling heat houses again. And you'll see it up at the roof line where there's a vent for the attic.
Yes.
So it's a lot colder there. And you'll see just a little black on the wall there. Bathroom ceilings, all the time, because they don't run the fans and stuff. But I think out of all those I've inspected, there's only been a couple times where it was a roof leak or something else. And it wasn't toxic mold at that time. It was just still mildew, but left undone, it can turn into tearing out some sheetrock and doing a lot of repairs.
Why do most, especially kitchen exhaust fans, why are most of those vented into the attic in the units that were built in like the late 60s and 70s? That drives me nuts.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, it wasn't code then. There was no codes about where it has to go. And so they just stick them up in the attic, which then same thing happens when you go to do the attic inspection. The ply was just covered with black mold, but it's not necessarily toxic mold at that. But that starts causing like dry rot to the plywood sheeting or wood sheeting in there, because you got the moisture and it. Dry rot fungus starts eating on the wood and makes it non-structural after a while. Step through it from the roof.
Wow.
But now it's required to go through the roof. And it used to be just a vent. Now it has to be its own vent. You can't use a roof vent. You got to use a bathroom vent in the thing. And then now it has to be wrapped in insulation. So, so it keeps it doesn't condensate as it's going up through a cold pipe. It keep the pipe warm. And then you're getting it out of the thing. But codes change every 3 years. So they're trying to just get better and better construction practices.
Yeah. My mind is just racing right now with all these things that I think, wow, I got to tell the next buyer or the next seller that calls me that owns a 1974 two-story walk-up in campus. Hey, we better have Doug come look before we put this on the market. So in a situation like that, I know that your reports are very thorough. You include pictures as well as a summary of your findings in the back of the report. But if you've got a seller that knows he or she is going to put their property on the market, could they hire you to come out and just have you do a walkthrough on things like that and point stuff out so they could get their contractor or handyman out to cure that stuff?
Absolutely. I just call it a pre-sale inspection.
Okay.
And it's not a complete inspection where I'm going into every single room, but I'm just looking at systems, taking a peek in the attic, in the crawl space, just to see. The last thing you want is to have a buyer on tap and then to find all these things. And it kind of sours the buyer about, oh no, this got a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. Whereas if some of them are just very simple issues, you fix them and then it's a lot cleaner for the buyer when the buyer's inspector comes through.
Yeah, especially if the seller has, during negotiations up front and trying to come to a sales price, if a seller's given some money up to come off of his original list price, in his mind or their mind, they're thinking this property is as is. You can do all the inspections you want, but I'm not kicking in a dime for repairs or anything that you find during your inspections. And I always try to tell my seller that's a position that you can take, but that's not necessarily going to get you across the finish line. So,
correct. Well, it reminds me of the one we did in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
And it was maybe 20 degrees out, 25 degrees that day. Sunny and clear day, but it was 25 degrees. Walked through the building, all the apartments, all the units, and everything was beautiful, nicely kept up, nicely maintained. The outside of the building looked good. I think it had a new roof. And at that point, you and Bob said, well, everything's looking good.
We're freezing. We're taking off.
We're going to get in the car and go have lunch or something. And I said, okay, I'll do the crawl space. And that's where the train came off the tracks there. Completely, I went down there and it was like steamy. It was just like, almost like a fog down there because there was hot water leaking. The dryers were venting under the apartment building, and multiple galvanized pipe leaks going on, and with the dryers pumping all that wet, hot air from the dryers down there, there was just rot everywhere, and it was moist, and obviously the buyers pulled the pin on that one.
They actually wound up closing on that because
Okay.
they were in a 1031 exchange, but we got a significant price reduction from the seller, and the buyers put some money in escrow, but it took the contractor 6 weeks because they had to fix all the underlayment where that moisture was and revent all the dryers, and it took them 6 weeks to cure that.
And if you'd spotted that ahead of time, that could have all been repaired and got top dollar for that building.
Yeah, I remember the buyers really wanted that property because it was in a certain neighborhood that they really wanted to buy and own in. And the seller was like, nope, not kicking in any money. And I was like, well, I'll send you over the termination. And then it was like, oh, well, how much do you have in mind? And then the tune changed a little bit.
And you have to get bids. And,
Yes. Hey, what's your opinion on bids? I typically find if you have the time and the resources to get 3 bids for a roof or whatever you need to negotiate on, that's probably your best bet. Do you have any input on that?
Absolutely. Actually, this past week, for example, I was getting bids on an outfield fence for the South Eugene High School baseball field, varsity field, because it's missing 200 feet that they would always put up a temporary fence. So they wanted to finally redo it. And I got bids from $10,000 to do it. And the next one down was $6,500. And then the next one was $4,500.
Wow. That's a big swing.
Now you got to go, is the 4,000 too low? Is 6,500 the best price? Then you go back and say, okay, what's included? What's the specifications? Are you selling us cheap stuff? Or is it a good roof or, not so good? Yeah. So 3 bids or more.
Yeah. When you talk about roofs also, you really get what you pay for a lot of times with roofs. I find buyers, especially on apartments, have a tendency to want to go as cheap as possible, obviously, because they're bringing in all this money for their down payment. They've got closing costs. So by the time you get ready to close, and now, oh, by the way, you got to replace the roof and it's $40,000, $50,000. It's just one more big chunk of money that needs to come in. What do you recommend? And I realize you're not a roofer, but just in general, what do you recommend for the ply, the tab? What are you shooting for a roof when you're getting a new roof put on? You want a 20-year roof, 30-year roof?
Yeah, definitely is the old style 3-tab roof. It's only 15, 20-year life is cheap. I would never do an overlay over top of the old roof. You always want to strip it all off, make sure the plywood's all good, and replace it. The 25-year architectural or above, which is called a laminate roof because it's high-low. So a 25 to 30-year roof, I think, is the best scenario. You can pay more money and get a little heavier duty for a 50-year roof, but it's just so much more. I'm not sure you get the life out of it. So whatever they tell you it's warranted for, or the expected life, I always subtract 5.
Oh, that's
because that's only under perfect conditions. And if you clean it, demoss it twice a year, that sort of thing, is it going to last? It's just like your car. You can change the oil every 5,000 or every 10. In the long run, the more often, the better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about systems, electrical, plumbing, HVAC. With the electrical panels in particular, the insurance companies, if you have the old federally recalled panels like a Zensco, the insurance won't even put insurance on it till that's replaced. What are you seeing and talk a little bit, if you can, about the insurance inspections that you do.
Okay.
What do those entail?
Well, if we start with systems first, talk about the heating systems, what I find in apartment buildings, the older ones were all ceiling heat. Mm-hmm. And the retrofit for that is to put a little more efficient wall heaters in, which can be easily done. You got a thermostat on the wall, and you just drop a wire from the thermostat right down to a wall heater. That usually works the best on upgrading that. Some of the older apartments have baseboard heaters, which aren't terrible, but it's still just straight electric resistance heat. And I don't find too many apartment buildings that have forced air systems, whether it be just a straight furnace or furnace with an air conditioner. You just don't see a lot of those until we get to the newer high-end apartment buildings that have like mini split heat pumps for the main living rooms. And those are super efficient, cost less to run, and heats and cools the places really well, because you basically have a source in every major room. So when we're doing apartments, I usually find we're looking at ceiling heat or wall heaters. And then there was a certain period where cadet wall heaters were recalled. I found one actually 2 days ago in a commercial building.
Wow.
And the reason they're recalled is they get clogged and they have no safety devices to shut off. And they were starting apartments on fire.
Oh, wow.
This is around 2,000 cadets were recalled. And certain model numbers you can look up on the internet. And they've been recalled. They, should have been replaced 25 years ago. This one still had it. It was completely clogged.
Oh, wow.
And luckily, it was just in it was in a daycare center in an old bathroom that the employees used. So I don't think it was used all that much. So you have things like that. And then moving on to the electrical, there's about 3 or 4 older electrical panels that, especially in a residential setting, should be replaced. And like you said, their insurance companies won't insure the building if they have them. And it's Federal Pacific, Zinsco. And some insurance companies think that the old Bulldog electric panels should be replaced, which they're like push buttons on and off.
Oh, yeah.
And although they work pretty good, but sometimes the push buttons, you push it and it says off and it's not.
Oh.
So, that's been the reason for those. And then any of the older Cutler hammer panels that have 4 or 6 breakers built into one block, well, if one goes bad, you can't replace them. And so insurance companies haven't been calling those out, but I call them out because that means they're, 50, 60 years old and, they don't improve with age. You can't replace a breaker. So better to update it. A lot of the brands have been around for years and they're all still the same exact, like GE and different brands are all the same, been using them for many years. And you can find replacements for it.
On the cadet heaters, I have a question about that because I see a lot of times, you talk about dropping the line down right below the thermostat. I see college kids in particular, because they don't know, they're away from mom and dad for the first time. So they push their beanbag up against it because it felt really good to sit there at 10 o'clock at night and study, but then they go to bed and the beanbag stays there. I've also seen primarily in affordable housing where they put them up. So they're up higher.
Right.
Does that still give you kind of an energy efficient situation, or is it your heat's just going up to the ceiling?
When they're down low, they create a better airflow. You see the hot air rises and it sucks the colder air in from the bottom and pulls it through the heater again. When it's up high, it's not quite as efficient, but it still works. And that's why the new cadets have thermal cutouts. You put a beanbag up against it. If it gets too hot, it just shuts off.
Oh, wow.
And if it happens more than once or twice, then there's a little reset inside that clicks and it won't come on again until you physically take the cover off and reset it.
Wow.
Which means, it's tried to go off a couple times.
So at that point, a property manager would have a pretty good idea what's going on.
Right.
And they could suggest to the tenants.
Right.
Yeah.
The baseboards, the only fear that I always had is you come in, maybe it's summertime and there's clothes and stuff piled all over the heaters. Well, come wintertime when it's going to kick on, it can set curtains or clothes on fire. Mm-hmm. So they're not the best choice for apartments either.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk a little bit about your inspection process for insurance companies.
Well, this has been something that's been going on for 2 or 3 years now, maybe. But I'll get a request from an apartment owner saying State Farm, Farmers, different companies said I need to have an inspection on the building to verify what's there. And so they want to know, normally they just want to know how old's the roof, what's the condition of all the heating equipment, what's the condition of the plumbing, is it copper, galvanized, PEX, CPVC, they want to know the type and what condition it's in. And then on the electrical, they want to know if it's copper wiring. Does it have one of the recalled panels? And is it functioning and in good condition, or is it old and needs to be replaced? And if any one of those is a no, it's old or whatever, they can say, well, we're not going to insure the building. And I've had a lot of calls in the past year of homeowner or apartment owners in a panic over their insurance being canceled.
Yeah. Are you seeing that primarily in apartment buildings? Are you seeing that at all in office, or is it just apartments that you're seeing it?
Yeah, I haven't had any calls about office buildings or industrial or commercial stores, stuff like that. It's primarily all apartment buildings. And they're just trying to reduce their risk because they've had so many claims with the hurricanes and floods and fires in California and stuff like that. They're just tougher underwriting.
Yeah, I talked to a property manager last week. He had a client that had a property in Springfield. He received a letter, had to do an inspection, and it wound up costing him $48,000 to have the electrical panels replaced. Because he had also, I guess, the electrical mast needed to be upgraded or changed or something. It just was really expensive, and that's not going to add a dime to his cash flow.
No.
And he debated about self-insuring, but the self-insurance was just really expensive.
Yeah.
I had a client recently look at an office building in downtown Eugene, and it's been dropped from the list price down to where it's basically land prices. You could scrape it, and it's zone C2. So if you held it, you could build apartments or pretty dense multifamily there. So this guy was looking at it. He was a contractor by trade and thought, well, maybe I'll buy that. He was kind of on the fence about buying it. And I told him, I said, right now the insurance premium is about $1,000, $1,050. But I said, you can triple that at a minimum. And he said, well, maybe I just won't put insurance on that. And I said, are you nuts? You've got 2 tenants in that building. You cannot afford to have no insurance on that. It'll wipe you out. Even if you just put that property in an LLC, they'll find different ways. Hey, you don't want to be the front page of the newspaper, irresponsible landlord and everything else. So anyway, I talked him out of it. Yeah. Even though it was probably going to be a good investment, he could hold it and land bank it. I wound up talking him out of it. Yeah. There was knob and tube wiring upstairs that would have to be removed. And it just was complicated. When we did the walkthrough, there was a silver plate on the hot water heater, and there was some black puffy smoke things around that plate. And I was like, oh, every time we turn around, this property is going to have some issues. Yeah.
Well, that was another thing I didn't talk about on the electrical. Yeah. If it has knob and tube wiring, the insurance companies aren't touching it anymore. And in a case example of like the Zinscope panels, because I was an electrical contractor, I've been to 2 or 3 house fires that were caused by the electrical panel. But there's always got to be a cause first. So it's like a short happens. Well, this particular case, a little girl her bed was sticking away from the wall this far, but she had plugged in like a double tap, and then the plugs were plugged into that, so it held the bed away from the wall, where she was pushing it, trying to get it closer. Well, the receptacle finally collapsed and shorted out, and the Zinscope breaker didn't trip.
Wow.
And then that wire, who knows how many amps are flowing on it, like 10,000 amps or something. And it just turns cherry red and started the attic on fire. So we were called in to rewire what caught fire and fix it. But it was interesting, the insurance company wouldn't pay to have the panel replaced, which was the cause of it.
Really?
Homeowner says, yeah, get rid of this panel. I'll pay for a service change.
Yeah.
Which was a wise thing to do.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Did the little girl live?
Oh, no, nobody got hurt.
Nobody got hurt.
They were all here. That's the thing. They were all home.
Wow.
And they heard this buzzing and shorting, and it's like, and then all of a sudden they noticed, smoke coming out of the attic, and called the fire department.
Wow.
But if that happens at night or something, who knows?
Yeah. Wow. My son, just to segue, a couple of years ago, jumped out of a 2nd-story house fire because he lived with a bunch of roommates. He was out of college, working adult, and 2-story house, and some of his roommates smoked. And so they took the batteries out of the smoke detectors. What a stupid thing to do.
Yeah.
And one of his roommates went downstairs for breakfast. And as she closed the door to her room, there was a tapestry, and the wind from the door caught the tapestry and blew it over a candle. Her bedroom was actually in the basement. So her bedroom caught on fire and then spreads up. And my son jumped out of a second-story window with his cat under his arm. Didn't break anything, but I am like passionate about, smoke detectors and safety. And
well, nowadays that's on the owners of the building that have every 6 months inspect them and test them, and it's on the management company. It's interesting when I do inspect apartment complexes, I'll note that there's smoke detectors there, but I'm not going to take the time to test every single one of them to make sure they're working unless I see it missing, because that's on the management. Should have been done within the past 6 months.
Yeah.
It's the reason I don't look at. And plus, some are so high, you got to get a ladder to test them.
Okay, for my listeners, I love my property management friends. They would give heart, body, and soul for my clients and for me, but don't assume that they are doing those inspections. It's your job as a property owner to ask the management company to post those units. And either you ask for a report after they've walked through if they're out of the area and you can't physically go with them. But if you live in that same city, you better go with them. That's your job as a property owner. Because like Doug's saying, you're liable, the property manager is liable, but at the end of the day, the tenant's going to sue you first because you own it. Right. So inspect your properties at a minimum every 12 months. And I like to just tie mine to the time change, daylight savings time and all that, because that's a good time to remind myself, I got to change the batteries and the smoke detectors at the rentals. Let's go walk through them. Now I think they've got like 10-year batteries, right? And most smoke detectors and stuff.
Right. So you just want to push the button to make sure it's still working. I've seen different property managers that do a really good job, because I was inspecting one a couple of months ago where I walk in and the tenant goes, well, we just had our 6-month inspection. And I said, well, this is for the sale of the building. So I know they've been doing them, but they just had a little form, because also they can see the housekeeping issues too.
Yeah.
It was an excuse to look at seems like to me, property managers don't do that much, that they could at least walk through them once a year, at least twice is better. Note the housekeeping, look under the sinks. Is it wet? Because so many times I walk into an inspection and I say, the tenant says, is everything working? Oh, yeah, it's great. And then I'm working along and they go, but under the bathroom sink has been wet for a long time. And,
Or they got a bowl or a
under the sink. Or I see water coming out from underneath around the toilet. Oh, yeah, that's been leaking there for quite a while.
It sweats.
Yeah. The best one was that same one that I just talking about, where I'm in this guy's apartment and I see this on the ceiling. I go, what's that? And he goes, well, every time the lady upstairs flushes the toilet, some water drips from there through his ceiling into his kitchen sink. And he said, since it was going into the kitchen sink, I didn't think it was a big deal. But it's still going through the ceiling, rotting the wood.
Oh, man. And of course, he had notified the property manager.
No.
Yeah.
I've been meaning to
yeah.
turn that in.
It drives me crazy because tenants are afraid they're going to get into trouble.
Right.
Really. And it would take 2 seconds to put in a management request or a maintenance request. And property managers are so appreciative. They can't fix what they can't see.
Right.
So if they don't know there's a problem, they don't know to come fix it.
And then the flip side of that, as I hear, is whatever's broken. I said, if you put a ticket in for that, I put it in 5 times and they still haven't come out. So you have different types of properties and managers and owners.
That is true.
Yeah.
You jogged my memory when you talked about water running out. You and I just did a deal in Newburgh about a year ago.
Oh, yeah.
And there was some water that was running out, but instead of coming out from the end of the toilet, it was coming out of an electrical socket. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. That was a brand new 51 units and brand new, like a year old, right? There was some moisture along the floor as it went into the bathroom. So you never know if they just showered and there's a little water on the floor. So I mentioned the tenant happened to be there. I said, what's going on here? Oh, yeah, that sometimes when I use my shower, water comes out of the light switches above it. And I went, yeah, have you turned that in? Yeah, they said there was nothing, Then I found it in actually a couple more apartments. And it turned out to be some problem with the shower valves and stuff like that. And then later we were asked to go back and use moisture meters and find it, and found it in quite a few. And then you were there for the repairs. I don't remember what happened then.
Yeah, we lucked out. We had a really good seller that was super responsible. And because it was new construction, he had the plumbing contractor go back and replace the shower valves. They were faulty and no one knew it until the tenant pointed it out. So that is one of the benefits. Otherwise, if my buyers would not have hired Doug, they would have taken ownership, and then we would have had a major mess to cure.
The longer it goes on, the worse. But you wouldn't think something like that would happen in a brand new, it was literally brand new.
Yeah. Well,
beautiful apartments.
Let's talk about the one that we did in Salem Keizer. We walked in, I followed behind you, and you said to the tenant, is everything good? Hot water hot, cold water cold? That's kind of your opening question. And remember the guy said, well, yeah, everything's okay, but I get this funky smell in my washing machine. And unfortunately, you were in the kitchen. I followed him into the bathroom. He turned on the water and he's like, smell that? Well, I burn out my sinuses with Zicam in college. And so I'm like, no, I don't smell anything. And he looked so disappointed. And I said, what's the problem? And he's like, oh, you got to smell it right when the water comes on the first time. He's like, it smells like rotten eggs. And I was thinking, oh, I'm a gagger. So I'm really glad I didn't smell that. But then I called you in and I was like, hey, Doug.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
It did have the rotten egg smell, which is usually sulfur in the water. And it turned out that it was the city of Keizer, right? Had that area, they were trying to control it, but sometimes it gets out of control or something. And they weren't treating it completely or filtering it. And sulfur in the water.
And unfortunately, the tenants had washers and dryers in each one of their units because it was a brand new complex. I think that was like 40, 45 units. And we're talking an expensive project. That was like $15 million. The tenants were putting bleach in their washing machines because they just didn't know how to get rid of the smell. And the tenant said, yeah, the problem is about every third load, my towels and my clothes start to get that smell. So Doug came up with a good solution and advised us how to get that rectified. So we had the seller give my buyer a credit. So they traded out all of the supply lines to braided supply lines, and they changed the anodode rod in the hot water heaters because that's what, I think they took them out. It's been over a year now, but I remembered we had to change every rod in the hot water heater because that was creating part of the smell also.
Right, it was a reaction between it,
Yeah. So that's what 30, 40 years of veteran experience will get you. 50 years. Doug was like, well, I think, if I remember right, you could do this and this. And just pointing me in the right direction so I could do fact finding and research was so helpful. And we talked to some Culligan water guys, and we talked to the city of Keizer. And city of Keizer was polite, but they were like, can't help you. I mean, that's just common for the area. And it was like, well, that's unacceptable. My buyer's not going to live with that. So we got to go to plan B. So
right. I thought it was going to be, the fix was going to be, some sort of water treatment system for, wasn't there 4 buildings or something? Like one for each building, but apparently the type of water heater element could be changed to a different type that didn't react with the sulfur. Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up, let me ask you some questions. If you're a buyer, what's 1 or 2 things that obviously they need to hire you and do inspections, but if you're going to buy an apartment complex, what's 1 or 2 things that they should think about as they're buying it and getting ready to go through their due diligence process? And the reason that I pause, my mind goes 20 years back for everything that we've done. Yep. And one thing that comes to mind is, 2 things. If you're buying an older property and not just the campus area,
right.
Look for underground storage tanks. I want you to talk about that, heating tanks.
Yeah, of course, the older the property, obviously before 1978, you got issues with asbestos in the ceiling acoustic stuff and different pipe insulations that have asbestos, or the older insulation that was blown in. So the vermiculite insulation came out of a certain place in Montana. It has asbestos in it.
Wow. Is
Yeah.
that pink fluffy stuff?
No, it's the stuff that looks like you get in your soil, garden soil.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then two, if depending on the age of the property and what the heating system is, I know we did that one, it was an old apartment building, like before apartment buildings were, it was that one
Campus?
at campus.
13 units.
13 units in it just looked like a big old sorority house.
Yeah.
It was still a house. It had a boiler in the basement that had been converted to gas. And so I could see old oil lines going outside, in actually two different. One went out to the back and some went out. And I said, there must have been tanks out there that they moved. They were above ground, but you never know if there's underground. And sure enough, we had it scanned and they found one the second time.
Yeah.
On that one. And then I did a older house that had been converted to a doctor's office up on Hilliard Street that just saw a little piece of copper line running up the foundation and into the building somewhere. Wow. And it was gas heat in there, and traced it around and get in the bushes, and here's a vent pipe. And so it's like, there's a tank here somewhere. And sure enough, it was right in the middle of the driveway. Had to be dug up. And then I just recently did a church in Cresswell. Same thing, had a big gas furnace, but out in the bushes, here's a vent line and a big old oil tank buried out there, which is, if they've been decommissioned or they hadn't had oil in them for a long time, and if they hadn't leaked originally, you're fine. They just dig down, cut the top open, and fill it with sand, and it's decommissioned. The worst case scenario is they do a soil sample and they find contamination, like they did at my daughter's house.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah,
that was really interesting.
It was a 1952 house and had a still functioning oil furnace. And she had it filled all the time. These people lived there for a long time, so they never converted. It was interesting because she had solar power put on the roof. It was like, well, that's progressive, but you didn't replace your oil furnace. And so when I inspected it for my daughter, and we told the agent we wanted radon checked, oil tank tested, and sure enough, it was contaminated. And the bid was like $5,000 to decommission it, unless they found more contamination when they did it. So I know how that goes. And so they said, well, we'll give you $5,000 credit. I said, no, you do the repairs. And when it's all clean and signed off by the DEQ, and it was $48,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
To dig it up. There was a hole. They put 4 dump trucks of rock in the hole they had to dig out.
Oh, man. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I didn't want to take on that.
Yeah.
I mean,
aren't you glad?
Well, the only thing that I gave in on is so then I said, well, now that the tank has to come out, we have no functioning heat system. Luckily, I was a cash buyer, right? Mm-hmm. But if that had been a bank buyer, we would have had to back out, or they would have had to put in a new heating system before they sold it again. So I said, well, I'll put the new heating system in, because that way I could get what I wanted. But yeah, it was quite the ordeal.
Wow. Good for you.
Yeah.
Boy.
I hadn't told you that story? I
didn't know that the final ticket price was $45,000. But is your daughter going to send you a chocolate basket every month for life? I mean, does she realize how lucky she is?
Well, it was still on a septic tank in the middle of Tiger. So that was $14,000 for them to put a new sewer line in. Wow. But they had started at $650 for the house, and then it kept sitting and going down and going down. And it didn't come on my radar till it was $550. And then they dropped it to $525 again, and that's when I offered $520. And they took it, but then we did inspections. And then when all of this happened, I think we finally negotiated $510. But I had to put a heating system in, but that was not a problem. And we've added 2 bedrooms and a bathroom since then.
Great.
So, yeah.
That's
but
great.
No, I don't get chocolate baskets from her.
Well, you can give me
grandkids.
Just grandkids. You can give me your daughter's email address and I'll get you hooked up. Well, Doug, thank you for being here and being my guest.
Always interesting.
Yeah, It's been so much fun over the years, and I look forward to the next 10 to 20 years. I hope you stay in the business out long.
Yeah.
Good.
I plan to, as long as I can still get around.
Good. I know your wife doesn't allow you on ladders, so if we keep you off ladders, maybe she'll let you stay in the game.
That's what my son-in-law Eric's for.
Yeah.
To go up on the tall roofs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Feel free to send me a message if you'd like more information. We'll put Doug's contact in the show notes. Please hit the subscribe button and share this with friends and family and anybody that you might know that would be interested in Doug's services. And have a great day.